podcast. As always, I'm your host, Matt Ryan, and I am joined, as always, by Big Rob Fabian and Cory Hammond, but we also have a guest with us today on the 3-on-1 podcast. One of the things we talk about here in the A7FL is the idea of being a safer professional football league. And with that, today we have one of the new medical advisors, the chief medical advisor for the American Sevens Football League, Arthur DeLuigi. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us while you're at the Mayo Clinic in Phoenix to be a part of the show today. We are so grateful you are able to make the time to talk to three schnooks on the internet about things that we barely understand at like a surface level. Like at a subsistence level, we get maybe 3% of it, most of it being the word football, but I digress. When it comes to your path to becoming our chief medical advisor, what attracted you to the A7FL? What got your attention, and what was the path to getting you here today?
One of the things that when you look at the league itself, right, and with the way it situates itself compared to the other football leagues is, without the helmet, from that standpoint, oftentimes the helmet is used as a weapon, and that's where we've had a lot of the head injuries now. People, are feel safe because they have the helmet on, and so that they would make the contact. And this is one of those unique opportunities that I saw the A7FL and was reaching out for opportunities to work and collaborate to try to continue to make this game safer than the other leagues that are out there.
And Doctor, when you took a look at the A7, you talked about no helmets, no pads. That's one of the big things that we've stressed as a league. I think the 3-on-1 throw-off is also an amazing example, not to belabor the pun because we are the 3-on-1 podcast, but the 3-on-1 throw-off, and we've seen it numerous times in this league where you have elite athletes being able to use their speed and athleticism and not basically become human lawn darts. There have been positions in traditional special teams in pro and college football where there are just living weapons out on the field their job is to launch. Brian Pillman, who was a pro wrestler and a football player for the Cincinnati Bengals, basically encompassed that job and had probably a deleterious effect on his brain. What about special teams in football? And we've seen some horrific injuries coming on special teams play. I believe one recently in a high school game from New Jersey. Cory, you can speak more to that because I believe it was in your town. But
yes, it was.
The idea of our special teams, is that something that should be universally adopted, or is that something to be looked at as a potential solution? Because we saw the XFL's very dangerous original iteration on how to deal with kickoffs. We saw the first game in league history, a guy's leg completely imploded. What about the 3-on-1 is safer? I've kind of laid it out already, but what's your thoughts on the 3-on-1?
Right. So, comparatively, when you're looking at it, you're talking about those wedge busters, right? So they would create a wedge, when I played, those were part of the things that I would do, right? So, and, before I was a doctor, from that standpoint, you'd go back and you'd run together and you'd make the wedge, right? So that you'd have that line that would be moving forward. And so when you're on the kick coverage team, right, you have people whose sole purpose is to come flying in there and bust that wedge, right? So, they're going full kamikaze and trying to take down as many people as they can, right? So that others can make the tackle in relatively open field without any other blockers in the way. So, eliminating that and going, with the 3-on-1 setting, right? You don't have that, that full forward momentum that's coming through, right? So, and many times the wedges, you're relatively stationary. Even when you look at onside kicks, right? Used to have the team getting a 10-yard running start, and the other people are standing there completely still with the ball coming at them, right? And they have to focus on catching the ball, and they're getting obliterated, right? From that standpoint. So, when you're looking at, player safety and and trying to prevent potential catastrophic injuries, those are easy things that you can change by going with one of the something like the 3-on-1 a setting like that for special teams. So
One of the things you were talking about is with the using the helmet as a weapon, and the metaphor that I always use, because I'm a youth coach locally here. I try to get really involved with the Heads Up football program, which is getting the head out of the game in the form at these younger levels, as well as these guys out there that come and help us. A organization called Tip of the Spear, some former NFL guys, changing the way offensive linemen kind of, the Rob knows the way he was coached is you got to go into it and you do this thing and you get your head on the side of the ball so you can drive, as opposed to, more of the, the hip thrust to get underneath and change the momentum. So you're striking at an angle and upward and all that kind of stuff, which is great using physics and science in football. But the metaphor that I use for the kids is that if you have a suit of armor and you're Iron Man, you're going to go out there and you're going to fight the, Centauri, to use the Avengers metaphor, a little bit different than Hawkeye's out there with just those glasses, right? So the mentality of the football player changes with less armor. And what I love about the way that the true form tackle in the A7FL is executed, there's no love lost. And I've heard, Big Rob could speak to this. I was talking with some of the guys out in Vegas on just our calls, talking after the games. And I was reminiscent about a Ron Clark hit, Rob, in which after an interception, a safety blocking, kind of that clean side, change of possession, easy hit. He's striking with the shoulder. Head away to the middle of the now, it's a change of possession. So the former offensive player, now defensive player, he struck him in the body so hard, it sounded like fireworks were going off a mile away. So the physicality and the ferocious hits that we love about football can still be here. But as a doctor, you would say, right, if you're striking with the right part of the body in the right form without the protection and everybody's doing the right thing, that makes this game, in comparison, much safer, does it not?
Oh, absolutely. Good technique, utilizing other parts of your body to, be able to take down an athlete, and make a tackle, and that could still be a vicious hit, right? But not leading with your head, right? So, and there's opportunities where you could train with other sports that, are utilizing for takedowns. Rugby is one that is quite assimilated with some of the rules. I played rugby in college. Prior to that, I used to wrestle. So, so when you're doing that, you don't want to put your head down, right? Because then you can't see where you're trying to go and take down, right? So you learn how to use leverage, you learn how to use power, from that standpoint, without having to use your head and be able to, take somebody down. So utilizing some of those skills that you could gain from, other avenues of training, and eliminate, the head first hits, right? So from that standpoint, but, back we were saying back in youth, many times you kids, including myself, would look at your helmet and see how many scars that you had on the helmet, right? Like, look at this, orange streak here, right, and this white. And there's a little chunk taken out of this one.
Collecting paint. Yep.
And exactly. And so, if you had the most paint, right, then it was like, hey, you're being more, you're being more active, you're being more physical, you're being in there, right? So, the mentality then is, even
maybe
when you're a younger
conscious
kid, right, you're thinking about using your head, because out of all of the equipment you have, your helmet's big and strong, right, from that standpoint, right, and can do damage. So if you're kind of looking at, moving away from that, and that was one of the things that I was saying, that maybe we need to go backwards, as from that standpoint, with the helmet revolution, instead of making the helmet, smarter and harder, and encouraging them to continue to hit with the head. And you say, well, maybe we should go back to the other way, almost to the point where there's no helmets. That was, before I had discovered the A7FL. So it's great to see a league was also thinking in that same concept, right? So, eliminating that and using different, focuses on techniques of good tackling, and using your overall manpower in this situation for upper body strength, lower body strength, getting a good center of balance, and making a good form tackle, right, without having to knock somebody out with your helmet.
So I had a question. Is there
Yes.
such thing as a safe helmet?
There's where they say is, this is when you talk to different people, there are some people who say no helmet's safe because even when you're putting a helmet, so yeah, it's a peanut in a shell, right? So your brain is a peanut in a shell. And by putting another helmet on there, all you're doing is adding another layer of shell, but the peanut's still going to move around within the shell, right? So, and so you'll have people coin the term, intracellular helmet, right? So when we try to do the things would be to protect the brain itself, right? Maybe, having it where you have the nutrients that are in there or chemicals that would be in there for supplements, right, where you take it and it helps stabilize the neurons, those nerve brain tissue cells, but adding more shells, it's still going to move, right? So when we talk about, injuries, I'll use the term in boxing, it's that counter coup hit, right? So when you get punched in the face, you have that initial contact, but when the back of your head, smacks against the back of your skull, and then you go backwards and then you come forward again, the front of your brain then smacks the front of your skull, right? That's still going to happen even with your having a helmet on. So
what you're kind of laying out for us, because a lot of us understand the general principle that concussion bad, right? But right. I think what you're saying and kind of explaining is the helmet protects the skull.
Yes,
but since the way that the brain is in our skull, it is kind of like a floating body and can move back and forth. The danger is the brain moving back and forth and hitting the skull on those impacts, not the actual force cracking the bone that houses the peanut, right?
Exactly.
So no matter what the helmet is when the head is involved in the contact of a poor form tackle, the rattling of the brain is the problem, not how hard, soft, impact resistant, impact shock absorbing the actual equipment is, right?
That is exactly what I'm trying to say. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say I'm closer to dumb than, genius level. But I think it's important to kind of understand is well, I mean, I could be self-deprecating. We ended a whole show with roasting me and it was my idea. But I think so that people understand when we're talking specifically about this game, A7FL, what we're doing is we're removing the need for any type of protection for that peanut, because it's just best to make sure that the tackles are more Greco-Roman and rugby style, right, where it's a takedown, or what the Seattle Seahawks have been kind of teaching, that hawk tackle where they scoop and then turn their body. So it's almost, they use the momentum of the torque of the twist to be what brings them down. So we're getting really into the science of it now, not to break away from the more important part of it, especially with, recent events. Player safety, I think, has to be the biggest and most important issue, not only with football now, but the future. And like I said, I'm a youth coach, so this is something that I think about all the time. I have 3 sons. One's going into high school, and the high school that he is going to, Woodbridge High School in central New Jersey, was one of, if you didn't know, was one of the places where the worst thing that could ever happen happened. And I don't want to recap that because it's obviously a tragedy, and tragedies are tragedies regardless, whether it's a car accident, plane crash, right, or what happened, unfortunately, in a high school football game. But the fact is that for the future of football, whatever it ends up being, whether it's our league, which I obviously think is a great option, or it's the similarly, padded football that everybody's become used to, these issues with safety affect the most important thing, which is the pipeline of kids that are able to play because their mothers are allowing it, because it's not right, something that they feel comfortable. I coach youth football. 4th time I've said it. In my town there, 6 years ago, there was 5 teams. There's now 2 teams because they all combined, because the enrollment is going down. So the NFL and football in general may not ever be more popular than it ever has been. But if what feeds those professional leagues, including ours, is children learning to play this game the right way from the beginning, what do you say with the current conversation that we even have within our own circles within the league about trying to make this game something that we could tweak to be something that we offer for youth to continue this safety?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to, again, when you're looking at the kids, and you could talk about all injuries and pads and equipment, right, from that standpoint, right? So, when you look at, youth, you actually had the knee pads, the thigh pads, the rib guards, right? So a little bit of everything, right? So, you almost were like the Iron Man, right, at that point, because most everything was a gilded suit, right? To try to protect you, right? But those pads, with younger, skeletally immature youth, right? You're trying to prevent, a shoulder to the thigh, which is going to, crack your thigh bone, right? And injure your kneecap, right? From that standpoint. So, once you're skeletally mature adult, right? You'll see a lot of those players remove those pads, right? So, from that standpoint. But the helmet always has been there, right? The shoulder pads remain there. And even still, when you're looking at some of those skill players, the shoulder pads are becoming really petite, right? There were more.
I wore kicker pads.
Yeah, right.
Even in high school, I don't even know if I was
right. You didn't want gigantic pads, right? Unless you were a lineman linebacker, right? So where you didn't have to move your arms above your head as much.
Unless you would buy the Thick Boy season shirt, tinyurl.com/A7FL merch. Sorry, I just had to make a joke and plug. Always good to get both.
It's always great. Always great.
So to
help you continue to answer your question, right? This is going to back, almost could go back to the backyard football, right? From that standpoint, and when you talk about, comparatively, what makes soccer, right? Football everywhere else, so fan friendly, right? All you need is a ball and kids, right? So if we're coming back to here, football coming back to, going out there, teaching kids the right way to tackle, and you need ball and kids, right? It's going to go through, every community, from that standpoint, and you can still play safely and still be very active and enjoy the rules of football, right? Making the first downs, getting the touchdown, making those big plays and catches, dodging tackles, right? From that standpoint, without having that, or limit the injury potential, especially the catastrophic injury potential.
You mentioned the soccer. We have friends of the show. They do a podcast out in San Francisco called the All Pro Jaffos. It's a Country K guy from Florida, JP. And DJ Madsticks, not necessarily important, but one of the cool things that they said one time, I was a guest on their show, they were talking about our league. They saw our league as the way to bring football to the Olympics.
Yes.
Because of what you said about, the fact that, you don't need the pads. It's a pickup game. It's just a ball. And then anyone, anywhere in the world, if they have an oblong shape, whether it's a pineapple, whether it's a coconut husk, something, you could probably start the process like we hear about, like Mariano Rivera playing baseball in his hometown with a milk carton as a glove, right? So that type of, easy access of this game, whether all you really need is a ball and the want to, but would this be a scalable thing to make football a sport that we could maybe take this internationally?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so for that same reason. You can play as long as you have a playing field, right? Whether it being the street, dirt patch, grass, inside a hallway, right? You can play football with a ball and kids, right? So so that's really going to help grow it, especially across the world, right? Where you're talking about how much pads do you need and all the equipment, and football is a costly sport when you look at it from that standpoint, right? You need all of this additional equipment when you're growing up and playing youth football, right? So oftentimes you have to have a lot of money from the boosters to try to get the equipment, and right, and then going from all of that. But you can really take it to the bare basics, right? And teach the fundamentals of football without and minimizing the dangers of football.
Before the modern helmet, came out or was introduced in like the late 1940s and 1960s, they played a more rugby style of football.
Yes.
And for whatever reason, I guess they thought more equipment, more safety, more everything. But clearly the fatality spiked, and I don't think they made that correlation. But then you got guys like Cory had mentioned, like Steve Carroll, since like 2013 has been doing the heads up football thing. Why aren't more teams, coaches, owners paying attention to that and implementing it into the pro league?
I can imagine it's purely speculation, right? There's no beneficial investment for them, right? To some point, you could potentially say if they don't buy in more, right? There's been a lot of things that the different leagues, play 60 thing, trying to get kids out there and being active, right? But then when you're trying to go through a program that takes you away from your traditional game, they could potentially feel threatened to a portion, right? But at the same time, it has helped grow it, right? Some of these 7-on-7 leagues, right, from that standpoint, where flag football has helped grow, to an extent where kids are able to play, but flag loses a lot of that, that the physicality that you like to play, and even when you play full contact blocking flag football, right? It's not the same. It's not the same.
Don't let the other side of the ball hear you say that, my friend.
Yeah, it's not the same.
They spent 20 to 40% of their podcast talking about the glory days of flag. So
yeah. And I played flag football, right? And I played full contact blocking flag football, right? From that standpoint, and it's fun, but it's not the same as tackling, right? It's not the same sport, right? I'm a bigger guy, right? And I'm built like somebody like the Bus or Mike Allstott, right? So if you have to bring me down, it's harder than. But if you have to pull my flag, it's a lot easier,
Much
right?
easier.
Yeah. So from that standpoint, but you can still dodge and do spin moves and
dips, dives, and twerks.
Exactly. right.
Episode 19.
Yeah.
That was the name of an episode, and that's how it was discussing the ridiculous body movements that sometimes guys do in the flag. And I don't want to make this about flag versus tackle.
Yeah.
Now, just to kind of get off of the serious stuff, and then I think we'll jump back into it. Just keep in line. I'm the show killer over here. I'm here to derail everything. What else?
That's right.
What else about our league got your attention? Because it sounds like you're not only a doctor, which we all can look up to and have some admiration for, but it sounds like you're a football fan as well. So as far as the actual product and what you see as far as excitement and the way that it looks like football, you mentioned rugby before. We get that a lot. The thing about rugby is the physicality is there, but the beautiful chaos chess game that football has become, it's lost in rugby because it's more of just a physical form of basketball, soccer, where it's it's constant motion.
It's constant motion. Oh, the conditioning in rugby is amazing. Like
and those guys
most of our practices, we would run death marches back and forth across the field the whole time, right? It's just we would do passing drills where the whole way you do sprints all the way down, all the way back, all the way down, all the way back, and then you'd have to tackle people, and then do a scrum. Those were it's very physical, but it's a whole completely different game, right? It's backwards passing. It's it's like the Cal Stanford play every game for every single play, right? or the what BIC or the
did
the Patriots and Raiders a few weeks ago, right? That's the opposite end of that, right? So
right.
That is a whole other thing.
Yeah,
and we should talk about safety there because my guy Mac Jones should have just literally ran away from Chandler Jones at that point,
right?
So do you have a favorite A7FL squad or a favorite A7FL player?
I don't yet, and I've been trying to follow and going from that standpoint. Obviously you have some of the older, more traditional franchises being there. The New Jersey franchises have been, tremendous there, and it's great to see the league expanding. Coming out west and getting those opportunities here to be out there. Right, you have a lot of great athletes, who enjoy playing football, and still have those opportunities to have glory days out there playing. playing. And so it's a great way to do it, from that standpoint. But, it's great. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, so, there's no Pittsburgh leagues yet. There's no Phoenix leagues yet here, but it's good. I mean, a traditional, football, state like Ohio has two, right? Different leagues there now. And then obviously, LA, and, as it's continuing to grow and expand, I could just see this really, really kind of catching on at each of those different states, especially when you're talking about football hotbeds, that, lived and died. When I was growing up, football's everything, in Western Pennsylvania. So, it was, what the game of the week, all the high school football, just like was in Texas and Florida, and California as it grows. But there's a lot of under-recognized states that have extreme passions for football, and so I really think this has a chance to matriculate into those leagues. Even with the potential for our female athletes. So in Arizona, they just passed the AIA, Arizona Interscholastic Association. They passed a varsity sport for women's or girls, right? Because it's still high school, flag football as an official varsity sport now, right? So which is great, right? So I could see that growing here too with this opportunity.
And
women's hockey has grown. Women's rugby has grown. So the UFC and the mixed martial arts with women's division and boxing. These all these combative and pugilistic and more physically aggressive sports, right? But we could do it safely, right? So it's great an opportunity for growth across the spectrum here. So.
Yeah, and not to name drop, but another doctor involved in our league. You probably know her much better than I know her. I know her by her name because she's famous, is Dr. Jen Welter. And we actually, Rob, you could speak to this. The video is hard to find of it, but there was actually a Virginia team one year that came in and left the league immediately. And one of the Baltimore teams actually was winning by so much that they actually put a female into one of our A7FL games, and she actually scored. Do you remember that, Rob, 4 years ago?
You sure it was Baltimore?
It was the Virginia team that came in, and they were only in for like 4 weeks because they were getting beaten so bad. We're gonna have to go down to RTU. There was an official female. I saw the video, and it's been lost to the archives because it was more of a troll than anything. And it's keeping on brand for the podcast and myself. I'm going to talk about one of the all-time trolls. But one of the things that this league allows is for that ability to cater it to a game that would, I think, be an interesting way to involve the fairer group of us getting to play football.
Yeah, to
and
put
not
a finer
have it
point,
be ridiculous shoulder pads on top of lingerie, which is, I think, just offensive.
Right.
But
to put a finer point on it, Cory, I think that the A7FL is the most universal brand of football when it comes to the accessibility of the game. All you need is a ball.
Yes.
There's no need for pads. Anybody can play it. The 3-on-1 affords just for anybody with athleticism in the way that you see in high school games now. There's a lot of young women who are becoming kickers or punters. The opportunity for them to be returners in this game is entirely possible, as Rob's cat adorably climbs all over him on the podcast, that's the thumbnail this week. On a very serious episode of the show, it'll be Rob and his cat. We are
what's
on
your cat's
brand.
name, Rob?
This one's Gray.
Gray on the shoulder. So I got gray on the top of my head. Rob's got gray on the shoulder.
Well, to ask another question, Dr. DeLuigi, the evolution of football and American society has grown from, the fields of college, whether it was Harvard, Yale, what have you, going back almost over 2 centuries at this point, to the tipping point where Teddy Roosevelt had to get involved because the game became too violent and took more people than any game should, to the number 2 sport when it was college, the evolution of the NFL, and the thing that I think a lot of my generation and a lot of Rob, Cory, and your generation would look at as the 1970s, which was the era of high passes and hard hits. We at the A7FL have a lot of hard-hitting players. But it's what you've talked about before with the pads, the style of tackling that we teach in the A7FL, the ability for our athletes to learn a different way, that makes it the most universal style of football to me. But when you look at things, because you've worked, your resume includes Georgetown, the United States military, you're currently at the Mayo Clinic, you've worked with the Arizona Coyotes, you have a curriculum vitae that would put 99% of the people I know in my life to shame. But when you look at all the stops you've made and you look at the future of football, what are the things medically that can be done on a subsistence level? Because one thing that we've talked about is the turf monster, whether it's calling A7FL games, the possibility for that, for the way that we look at grass versus turf, because back in the day, turf would, the original AstroTurf was basically concrete. And I'm going in a roundabout way to say, what are ways that football can be done safer? I am very stupid in trying to articulate a very delicate question, but how do we make football safer with the current means that we have, the different fields, the different styles of play? What are the things that we can do that are considerable layups that maybe the A7FL haven't touched yet?
Yeah. So, many times in medical, we talk, there's a couple different injury categories that we go through, right? There's the overuse, right? Those are the repetitive motion, right? The contact and the non-contact, right? So, what you were saying, the turf monster, right? That's a dreaded non-contact injury, right? So, you're not doing anything. The turf just grabs your foot and doesn't let you go. And, someone like Jamal Anderson blows out their knee, right? There wasn't anybody within 2 yards of him, right? The turf monster got him, right? So you're looking at something like that, right? And that old style turf, right? It was not forgiving, right? And so the newer style turf is good, right? But there's still some injuries with it, right? All the little, those pebbles that they have in there, it kind of gives that give, right? Makes it more grass-like. Grass is always still great, but there's still always potential for injuries from that standpoint, right? Especially when you play more and more games on it. How many times with the different stadiums you're saying, well, look how shredded this turf is. It's going, right? The players are slipping and falling, right? They can't get the grass because the grass isn't taking anymore, or they just planted the new sod and the sod hasn't taken, right? So those are non-contact injuries, right? Those are harder, right? So we can't come up with the perfect substance yet, right, to kind of make it to eliminate them completely. But I think that we're getting to that balance of the newer style turf and the grass fields, are good to take away some of those new non-contact injuries. Having good techniques going to take away those contact injuries, right? And so you're still going to get some, right? So when you have any sport, right, there's still going to be contact injuries. Even when you're playing something that's a non-contact sport like basketball, right? There's still a lot of physicality with it, right? You're not tackling people in basketball, but there's still hard fouls and injuries that can come from that, right? So we're not going to completely eliminate injuries, but if you can eliminate, catastrophic injuries, if you can eliminate, those really detrimental injuries, there's still maybe people who will dislocate a shoulder or separate a shoulder from that standpoint, or you're going to have sprained ankles, right? No matter what sport you're playing, you're getting sprained ankles, it seems, right?
Right.
But the stairs wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could be walking the dog and sprain your ankle, right? So,
we famously talk about how many kids I got. Yeah, there's enough Legos on the floor. You could have a whole bunch of different injuries. Some of them might just be your pride, because if you step on a Lego, but let's not, let me not destroy this show totally and get us off the rails and onto a highway. What evidence have you seen that proves the theory about our game? Because everybody talks about just not having the helmets from the rip is just already a good starting point. But then you have people that would maybe potentially, to play devil's advocate a little bit, that would argue, well, if the head does hypothetically come involved, there is no protection for the skull. There is no protection, for instance, orbital bones and noses and cheekbones and jaws and stuff. So what evidence and how overwhelming is the evidence that this game, the A7FL in the form that we play, is safer, especially towards head injuries and concussions specifically.
So it's going to come back to it's going to come down to injury surveillance studies, right? So, league surveillance, having reporting of all injury types and days missed and coming back through that, comparing them to the other sport, right? From that standpoint, but when you're talking about evidence, a lot of time it's going to be extrapolated from, right? Because if there's not been a database collecting all of this, to go head to head from that standpoint, you're going to go to, number of player contacts, so all practices, all games, how many injuries are coming from it, right? So then you could say how many events are occurring per contact, right? So, total contacts, right? So that's really what it's going to come down to long term, right? So in the short term, you look at things that you'll take into sport, which emphasizes head contact in one aspect, but in another variation of that same sport, de-emphasize head contact, boxing, right? So if you look at boxing, and when you're going to professional level, you get rewarded for knocking a player out, right? So, right. So that is one of the biggest ways you win, right? Is you win by knockout, right? In the youth sport, it's point system, right? You get 1 point if you hit them in the head, and you get 1 point if you hit them in the chest, or right. So you have a singular scoring blow, right? So you're not seeing people trying to knock people out, right? Because you leave yourself more vulnerable, right, to have points, and you could still lose, right, from that standpoint. So it's changing the rules. It's changing to de-emphasize those head contacts by removing the helmet, right? So you still have a head guard in the youth sports, right? But there's not that much head contact, right? You're not usually headbutting somebody, right? So there's not very many sports that emphasize headbutting somebody, right? So most people don't want to split their head open, right? So if you don't have a helmet on, you're not trying to lead with your head to split your head open. Boxing, right? How many bouts are stopped, right, because of an uncontrolled bleed, because of a inadvertent headbutt, right? The game, they stop the game, it's over, right? Even with MMA, right, from that standpoint, they don't do it. Wrestling, right? Even professional wrestling is about the only time they show a headbutt, but they're not actually contacting heads most of the time. But wrestling itself,
if you're doing it right, you don't hit them in the head.
Exactly, right, exactly. So if you don't have that false protection, right, you're not trying to split your eye open every single time, right? Boxers still get hit in the face a lot, right? But they're trying to protect their face, but they're not doing it with a helmet. Can you imagine, like, if they had the old, the amateur helmets on? They'd be even more aggressive with their head, right? From that standpoint. So I'd say, if anything, boxing would be our biggest evidence to show it, right? Because it de-emphasized the head hit, and you don't have as many, head traumas in the youth aspect of it.
Go ahead, Rob. You go, Rob.
Okay. I'm a little passionate about this point because I am an offensive lineman, a former defensive lineman, and we all know I'm 33 years old. In my time of watching football, the game has changed, right? The pro football has now it's a little more finesse. It's less guys running up the middle, smashing into the defensive line. I mean, it's way less that, right? So these finesse players aren't getting hit the way they used to get hit in the 90s, early 2000s, when guys were getting clean. And I know as a lineman, every play I'm making helmet-to-helmet contact with the guy in front of me. Do you think the reason why they're not rushing to get rid of the helmet in general is because the pretty boys aren't the ones getting hurt? Because you don't really see when we're in the trenches going to war, linemen aren't complaining about 80 hits a game. How many plays in football, right? Maybe 80 in total. Every single play, there's helmet-to-helmet contact with a lineman. Every play. If you do remove it, because I played in seven, and what I've noticed is I've never hit my head in A7.
Right.
Is it because we're the linemen, we're the big guys, we're the tough guys? Is that why there hasn't really been a rush to remove the helmet or do something about it? Because the pretty boys are safe.
Right. They're it's not this, like you said, it's not the sexy position, right? It's the grunt work that that really makes everything work, right? When you don't have a line, it doesn't matter how many first round quarterbacks you have, they're one and done, for the most part, right? So, having the lines there, but and when you look at the history of even with the people in the NFL with the CTEs, right? You had the Justin Strelzigs, the Mike Websters, right? They're the ones who are having the worst, long-term problems, right? The CTEs, committing suicide, unfortunately, in both of those cases, so it's all of those repetitive sub-concussive hits, right?
Mhm.
But the accumulation is tremendous. But like you said, if you're in a situation where you're blocking man on man and sevens, right? It's a whole different technique, right?
Completely different.
It's like you're like the moving screen, right? With physicality, right? Because you're allowed to push in basketball, right? It's the guy going up and doing that pick at the top, right?
Right.
You're getting your body in the way. You're still driving them, right? But you're not putting your head. You're not trying to get that leverage. You're not trying to, somebody else isn't trying to, you might not have as many rip curls and going through those different portions where you're going to get those contacts from one. I was a lineman too. That's so I,
Right.
so back in,
I hear the passion. I hear the passion.
yeah. So you get almost every single play, right? Somebody's coming and hitting you from the side. Somebody's hitting you from the back, right? It's just a big scrum, right? Every time, right? So, and I would not doubt it. I would not doubt it because they're they want that physicality up front to protect the like you said, the pretty boys
Right.
in the pocket and out with the speed guys on the sideline, right? But sometimes where the worst ones are, some of them, right? The Antonio Brown hits, getting their head taken off by
Right.
perfect and stuff like that. When they get hung out to dry, they really just get clobbered, right?
Right.
And they, I'm glad that they're removing, they've kind of taken that out of the game, a good bit, but yeah, I mean, there's not much that you can do and even when you're running back, right? So if you're running back, they lower their head and they take somebody
Mhm.
out, right? If you don't have a helmet on, you're not lowering your head, right? You're doing a stiff arm. You're doing, you might lean
Not
your
more than
shoulder
once.
into them. Right, exactly, right.
You can lower the head the one time and see how that goes.
One time, right? And then
I think
your head
I think
gashed
the
and
second
you get
time might
stitches.
not happen as quickly.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that that's not the sexy stuff, but if you look at the people buying our shirts, I don't know if it's just because Tone had to buy RTC the shirt, but
go.
man, every season's thick was season the A7FL, doctor. So we might just have to change the terminology in which term. But I think what you're talking about is, you mentioned the explosion that happened to Antonio Brown, and there's even talk maybe that all of this, abnormal behavior from him has kind of stemmed from that. But let's even go further with it, because we could even talk about a guy like Tua, but let's not get specific to any NFL player. We're going to keep it A7FL. Right. But, you guys are talking about the repetition of the sub-concussive hits is actually more dangerous than the wow, oh my goodness, he's out hit, because what happens to the guy after he's hit like that, at least in most leagues today, right? What does a coaching staff and a medical staff do when they see that hit?
They take him out.
He comes out,
and they assess for the potential brain damage. They put him into the protocol to make sure that the longevity of this player's, not only career, but also, obviously what happens after football. Right. I'm getting closer and closer to that as going to be 36 of the season starts. But that's where I think what you and Rob were just talking about with what's happening to the linemen.
Yes.
Right.
When do the linemen come out, Rob?
We don't, and that's the catch. We are consistently hitting with these sub-concussive hits.
Sub-concussive.
Constantly. Every single play, maybe twice a play, maybe once a play, but every single play. And I
make a joke out of it all the time, but as a quarterback, when I was playing 11 on 11, whether it was Pop Warner, high school, college, Rob, what does the lineman do after every play call in the huddle, 2 steps out of the huddle? He turns around and asks me what question?
Where are we going? What play is this?
What's the count? So it's like what I see as that is using your brain as a lineman is, I think it's undersold, because yes, there's levels of football where we were talking about it with the wishbone. It's like, if it's just simple offense, just block a guy in front of you. But at the NFL level, what Jason Kelce does for the Eagles, where he's throwing that bullet back to Jalen Hurts and he's doing a pull from the center position all the way around to the C gap, and he's going second level afterwards on a combo block. These guys are thinking all the time. So
100%.
When I get the guy turning around and he doesn't know what I literally just said, is that or is that not an example of short-term memory loss from these kinds of injuries?
Wow.
Right.
I mean, I make a joke out of it because we like to say that. We like to say that big guys, he's a dumb jock or whatever the silly little thing is. But the scary thing is that, again, I have to live every day with the decision whether my kids are playing football and the right way to do it. And guess what? I involve myself in coaching to make sure that a lot of the things that I've seen in my own career, luckily I've broken, limbs, ribs, jaws, and everything. I was lucky for whatever reason, I think, for concussions. But my brother played just as many years in football as me. I'm 6 foot, wife. I'm not 5'11". I'm 6 foot. If you look at my driver's license, I might just go get it. It says 6'2". No, that's a lie. My brother was 5'7". So his head, guess what? As a running back, wide receiver slot, picture Julian Edelman, a very famous head situation in a Super Bowl, which, I would have done the same thing, but I guarantee he had no idea what his name was in that fourth quarter. I don't know how he made that catch. It was probably not using, the neurons. It was probably instinctual. Right. But what I'm saying is my 5'7" brother playing the same amount of years of football as me had at least documented 6 concussions. Jeez. So it has always been something that's been relatively close to me, and I've been trying to think this. But I guess my question would be is that forgetting the snap count, that short-term memory loss, is that maybe what we're talking about?
I mean, that would be defined as neurologic deficit, right? So because that by itself, right? But like even when you're going with it, right? So you talked about players coming out. I haven't looked at this statistic specifically, from that, but you don't see many linemen in the concussion protocol ever, right? It's always the running back or the receiver or the DB or the linebacker. But offense, defense, linemen who are hitting their head every single play, you don't really see them on that. They're in protocol, right?
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously I'm not an NFL personnel guy. But the 45-man roster that suits up, they may have 3 quarterbacks, 6 wide receivers, and 7 offensive linemen to play 5 eligible positions. And sometimes they go with a tackle at tight end. So that's leaving 1 man or 2 men to potentially be the replacements at these positions. So I think Matt said it before, and I'm just kind of my character on the show is just kind of the blunt jerk at times. So we love the sport of football. I think we all love it. I think all of us are excited to see whether it's, the team that we're rooting for, or the story of can Tom Brady at 83 years old beat the Cowboys? And we're going to watch football, right? We love this sport. We're talking about it in our free time. My wife's like, can we, use the television tonight? And I'm like, no, it's A7FL time. So we love this game. And I think Matt said it before. We're talking about things that, even Rob, I don't even think he thought about oh man, I'm forgetting the count because I'm blocking so well and playing so hard. We love this game. In many ways, the competitive spirit, the teamwork, the working past the physical exhaustion, and also overcoming adversity. I think football is one of the best things that our young men in America can do to prepare them for what life is as an adult. At the same time, we're also talking about a sport that in this last calendar year, but in the past 6 months, a high school age child was doing this, and his parents now have to watch or avoid football for the rest of their lives, knowing that this is the reason. Right. And I don't want to go perfectly into that. So basically what I'm saying is in your opinion, doctor, since you're the one with the degrees, the intelligence, and the expertise, how do we fix football? And is the A7FL, unfortunately, even though with the recent events, it kind of benefits us as being part of the league just because we love it and it's fun. What is the fix for football? And is it A7FL at least one of those answers?
I definitely believe A7FL is one of those answers, from that standpoint. I think again, eliminating by eliminating head-to-head contact, right? Because head-to-head contact without the helmet is going to cause lacerations, over your eye, over your cheekbone, or your scalp, right? You do that once or twice, right? You're not doing it again, right? So could it happen inadvertently once or twice? Yes, right. It still could happen, but the chance of it being a concussive hit is lesser, from that standpoint, because you're not putting that full force, right? There are still chances with the NFL, right? Because you've seen safety from that standpoint, right? They're trying to penalize, right? Players, when you look at collegiate sports, being ejected from the game, being out for the next game, if you're using, really, using a sparing technique, to have, a dangerous hit to an unprotected, player, they're trying, right? They're trying to still keep that violence, right? But they're trying to cap that violence, right, to an extent. But there's still going to be hits. Like if you look at Tua's last two concussions, they were not that big of hits, right? But from that standpoint, but you clearly saw the effects of them, right? After he took those hits, and that's just one player one time, right? Just using that as an example, and. With those can still happen, right? Those can still happen because they weren't that vicious of hits to lead to, right? Yeah. So
the Tua thing bugs me, and I think it doesn't have anything to do with us, but it's really funny that the entire football universe, especially fans, looked at the Tua shoulder situation, hip situation, and wanted to make fun of his health as much as they possibly can until it was convenient to rip into the NFL because they saw a guy that was trying to, in a contract year, trying to fight through an injury, and they just didn't like the optics of the injury. And now all of a sudden we care about health. So everybody that was really concerned about Tua, but was also making fun of his arm strength because he was coming back from a hip flexor, just a very polite screw you, which is just my way of, killing the show in my own way again. Doctor.
No, you're not killing. I want to say something about the Tua hit too, where Tua, like you guys both said, Tua didn't get his clock cleaned or anything. No. It wasn't that. It was actually when he was swung to the floor, the head hit the ground and was shaking in that helmet. So it's like even if they take away those hard head-to-head hits, when these guys are hitting the floor, they're still smacking their head on the ground, and that helmet's not protecting them from that.
No.
And all those action hits, those trucks that we've had all that in A7FL, and I've seen 99% of the people get up concussion free. I don't remember seeing someone get up after getting trucked, stiff armed, run over. I haven't seen anyone, even a big hit. No one was concussed.
And even in pro wrestling, just to go with what Rob is saying, you're taught to tuck your chin to protect your skull. You're protecting yourself from whiplash. And even then, you're still not able to do it every time. If you get hit, you get slammed, and your neck or head lands first, that's going to cause brain injury. And Dr. DeLuigi, I'd love to talk about your role in the A7FL with the medical advisory board. What are some of the things you're looking to bring to the A7FL in terms of how we play the game, how we look at how we play the game? Because, we've been a part of several studies before, and the A7FL to me is the perfect encapsulation of the scientific method for professional football, because we've been able to make such seismic changes in how you play the game. And within that, what are the positives? What are the things that we can draw correlation to? There's so many touch points with the A7FL, but what are the things you're looking at as you look to, you're in Arizona, so you know a lot about mountains. This is an interesting mountain for you to climb. What's your path to getting there?
I think one of the first things that we're going to look to do is getting with the injury surveillance, so an injury reporting system that's going to be tracked so we can kind of get the full breadth of what injuries are occurring and when they're occurring, right? Being aware that, you can get concussions and alignment in practice, right? From that standpoint and tracking that, right? So once we know where the league has the softest spots, right? Then you can try to figure out how to prevent those from happening, right? So that's one of the unique portions of an injury surveillance. So you track over a period of time, and then you see this is one, you suspect these are going to be our most common injuries. And if it's that other thing that pops up there, like, well, we weren't expecting to see that type of injury come, that's where you can make changes with rules and make progress or finding out why, right? So then, and you can dive deeper. So, obviously concussion is going to be one that's going to be, watched and tracked, but, I would like to try to make the whole portion safer. So we can get more athletes coming and playing in the league and staying active and fit and competing, right? So, if and these people are doing it on their own dime with their, and on their own health insurance, right? So, so it's one of those, aspects is like, hey, like, look, this is your life, this is your livelihood from that standpoint, right? And I want you to come out and be safe, right? I don't want so every time we're going to have for every game we have, we're going to have 5 broken legs and 3 dislocated joints, right? We want to make sure we're trying to keep everybody out there, healthy and safe, right? From that standpoint. So that's where I'm going to be working with initially, is creating that injury surveillance system across the league, having the trainers report it. So it's going to be tracked, within a database. And then as we go, we're always going to be, monitoring that, seeing trends that are occurring, as we're collecting the data. But then, once we have all of that data to look at it retrospectively and say, all right, where were the biggest trends that we could change afterwards, right? Because some trends are easily identifiable, right? As they're occurring, you can see that there is, the train's off the rails, right? We got to bring this back in because, this is definitely happening. But some of them are the subtle things that you weren't anticipating, right? At the end of the year, you have 12 or 15 of these injuries. You're like, well, how did that happen, right? It wasn't a lot, but it was a lot more than I anticipated it would be, right? So how do we prevent that?
Now, I don't know if you've seen the video, but there is a viral A7FL highlight in which one of the members of BIC, Kason Cunningham, goes full huss mode. And have you seen that video that's went viral?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What would you as a doctor do for my guy whose knee severed so badly that we saw the MRI and it basically separated his, all of the muscles in his thigh and quad from his knee? What would you say would be the rehab my guy from the force has to do after an injury so bad?
It's going to take time, right? So one, it's going to take time. I'm going to tell them, right off the bat, we're going to, this is we're going to have to work together. We're obviously going to have to get everything fixed and then start building up that strength, right? And it's slow, steady progressions across that, right? From that standpoint, you have to build up the other musculature, around it to take off pressure off that as you're healing. But,
what do you think? It has a longer rehab process, rehabbing that injury physically or restoring his ego and pride after being dropped to the floor, not being touched, but the rock back and forth from such a violent juke, the huss, if you will. Yeah. And I can still hear the damn.
They just echo in the wind off of Asbury Park's beach.
Damn.
Yeah, may not be ever, as long as there's going to be a video out there, he's never going to completely shake that, right? That's going to fall forever, but he could rehab it back. But, it's one of those things where, the next time he goes, when he gets back out on the field and can play and going back, right, making that tackle, right?
Well, too bad for the force they didn't sign up for the fall, and they have to come as the kryptonite as a Scooby-Doo villain, right?
Right.
Guys, I don't want to continue to be a clown. Do you guys have any other?
I have a question.
Yes, let's be more serious, and then I can go back to my
your jocularity, your premature jocularity.
I was going to say my face. Well, that sounded terrible. I was going to say face paint, but pause.
Dr. DeLuigi, the elephant in the room in pro football is what happened 9 days ago. This we're recording this on Tuesday, but it drops on Wednesday. So on 9 days from when we dropped this podcast, the injury that went down in Cincinnati to Damar Hamlin. One of the things that came out of that, obviously, he's going to be okay. You know, the conversation and the worry initially was due, potential loss of memory or brain deterioration because of being basically dead for a few moments on the field and having no heartbeat. The media reaction to it. Certain people in the sports media community speaking a certain way that we call them bad take artists, colloquially. Do you think that in this day of social media, in this day of the hot take, the 24-hour news cycle, do you think that makes players more or less forthcoming to not just talk to you as their team doctor, but talk about their actual injuries? Are we going regressive into where players are trying to hide or subterfuge injuries? Like, I think it's an open secret that was a problem and probably continue to be a problem at all levels of sports because of that warrior instinct that many athletes have, especially in sports like football or combat sports. What have you seen in situations like that? The pressure of, let's just go out and say, a Skip Bayless, putting pressure on these athletes to perform, to try to check their male card or check their ability to be an alpha male. Do you see that having a deterrent effect? And I would love to hear from Rob and Cory after, because they've played this game. They understand what it means to be an athlete and understand the potential that some guys may show up to play hurt because they feel that if they admit pain or admit that they're not 100%, that they're somehow less of a man.
No. The way the league's set up, right? No guaranteed the league that you're talking about, right? No guaranteed contracts for the majority of the players, right? So, and there's definitely no guarantee for your starting position next week if you sit, right? So, so when they're looking back, I put all of this into my entire life to get to this spot, right? I'm not going to sit down and let somebody take it, right? I remember one in the not too distant past, right? Alex Smith had a concussion with the Niners, and Colin Kaepernick came in and did well and took them to the Super Bowl, right? Alex Smith never played for the Niners again, and he had a concussion, right? So you take something like that, right? If Alex Smith would have had a concussion again at another time, would he admit it, right? Would he try to hide it and not try to get into that situation again, right? Even though they're trying to teach them not to do it, right? Report, that's one of the biggest challenges with concussion, right? It's self-reported symptoms, right? So we have observations, right? When somebody gets punched in a boxing match and you see them wobble, right? You're like, oh, they're probably concussed, right? From that standpoint, that's what we're looking at. That's what, leagues are hiring spotters to look for. That's what you're looking at as a, a medical staff on a sideline, right? You're looking for those telltale signs, right? You don't have to rely on just them telling me, hey, I don't feel right, right? So when you have a chance to talk to them, you'll see their eyes rolling and, they're having their eyeballs bouncing back and forth and they can't stand straight, right? Slurring their speech, anything along those lines. But, when you have people calling you out, right? You're going to try to tough it out when you probably shouldn't, right?
Right.
Well, I also think that the other side of the coin, because we mentioned Tua before, these topics are most important, I think, when we talk about the developmental and the youth and the for fun leagues. I think the NFL as just a general thing, since it's the highest level of the sport, since Tua Tagovailoa, if he doesn't have a concussion this year, is a $350 million quarterback with $170 million guaranteed. And with the concussions, maybe he goes into the offseason. I have zero idea what the contracts are, but I would ask the three of you is just, if you were the GM of the Dolphins, would you give Tua, $30 million guaranteed for the next 6 years? And the answer is tough, because if you're really doing it as a business, if we're taking the humanity out of it and just playing, franchise mode in Madden, and you know that the guy's injury rating is 27. But the thing is when does it become consent from Tua that he's going to fight through it, and that we as the public can't attach our, selfish sensibilities that we just want to punish the NFL for giving guys concussions? Because I think everyone to a man will say that Julian Edelman in a Super Bowl toughing it out through a probable concussion to win the most important game maybe of his life was worth it for him, and people give him a pass. But in the regular season, when Tua Tagovailoa's, the rest of the people that ever have his last name will be set financially for the rest of their lives on earth, potentially for eons. If he were to make $300 million, and with inflation, maybe he'll make it to next year. But seriously, if we're okay with a Julian Edelman risking his future and life and brain health for a championship, why does the public, and why is it so wrong at the highest level of our sport when all of these guys accept the risk? And this is kind of counterproductive to the conversation we're having, but I just kind of wanted to ask the question because I guess it's relevant. Why is it not okay for a guy to push through to earn his family, generational money, and it's more important to get the win when it matters instead of the reason that these guys are playing in the cash? The whole Tua thing really bothered me, because when you see a guy have a concussion, you obviously feel for him. But at the quarterback position, when we've said that this guy is injury prone his entire life, and you see that he has at least the will, which I think is something that I admire, as a health professional at that level, at what point do you look a man in the eye and say, I don't really care at all about your toughness, man. This is more about life and death than it is about money and glory. Because for me, I'm the idiot that, and we had an argument about this on our show, I'm the idiot that went back in a game with a fractured right foot after the backup quarterback went 3 and out. And I mean, I threw a touchdown pass later, but I was not helping my team that much. I had a broken foot. Now I don't run, but what would be because I feel like if I was Tua Tagovailoa and I could make my family $300 million, if you told me I could work at a coal mine and I might not come out of the coal mine and I can get $300 million, long time ago in this country, people were doing that for 30 cents. So as a health professional, how do you juggle that? Because at the highest level, which is both the example for all of the people that watch it, which is all youth, but B, it's not the same as youth, where these kids are being entrusted and their future is a lot more to do with their health than the ability for them to complete, 70% of their passes. So I've talked enough. What would you say?
As far as when it comes to a specific time when it happens, that is part of the conversation sometimes, right? So when you take the Super Bowl versus a Week 5 injury, right? So you still have to do this at least 13 more weeks after that before you even get to the part where it's single elimination, right? Do or die. So you would be able to say, look, it's not as important that you're healthy, right? Next week, right? Right. There's no next week's game doesn't mean that much, right? So from that standpoint, we'd rather have you healthy when it matters the most, right?
Right.
Whether that's the right answer or not, right? Those are part of the conversations, right? And you're meeting with the GM, the coach, the players' agents, all of that, right? You don't have the players' agents with the youth is the parents, right? And you tell the parents, like almost every time, it's not that important that Johnny plays next week, right? Nobody's signing an 8-year-old, and a 14-year-old yet, right? So from that standpoint, but
you tell that to Mr. and Mrs. Johnny.
I tell that every day. Like, honestly, when I have our concussion clinic, I'm
like Mr. and Mrs. Johnny. He doesn't even play more than the 10 plays. It's okay if he misses this game. No, sure.
No, but I get it. So the Edelman versus Tua, obviously you don't want Edelman to keep playing with that, right? From that injury, because he's putting himself at tremendous risk.
Right.
But you understand, right, that after tomorrow, he doesn't have a game for 8 more
That's
months.
true. Yeah,
right.
That does make it, because it's the pinnacle. It's the last game of the season,
you have to play 6 days later, right? So that tincture of time, you have that, right? You can get healed, right? And the other part of it comes back to, and this is one of those things as a team doc, right? You talk to them, is it a contract year for them now, right? You hurt your back, right? And you can have back surgery, or you can try to push through it all year. Well, at the end of the year, now you have to have potentially back surgery, and you're not healthy for your next year, so you don't get that contract, right? Jimmy G, right? From that standpoint, right? So if you get the surgery done early, right, you might be healthy. So when it comes time, when they're trying to sign free agents before, before the draft, right, or just afterwards, right? Now you're healthy, you're able to make those passes. They're like, okay, we'll give this guy a contract. But, when you're asking about Tua's contract, we oftentimes will grade people on their health, right? And we'll make a recommendation to GMs and coaches. Not all of them are always listened to, right? But there different ones are, right? From that standpoint, you're like, Tua could be one more hit away, right, from his career being over, right, at this point. You could say that with anybody at any time, I guess, right? But the reality is, his risk is higher, right, because of the pre-existing health conditions that he has. I mean, he's a glutton for punishment, right? I mean, he had his hip dislocated in college, right? Not very many people have hips dislocated playing football, right? That's a car accident.
2021.
Yeah, right.
That's up like 40.
I know.
Bama was up 40.
Right,
Nick.
Right. I know. So he obviously he's a tough guy. He doesn't need to play the tough guy card anymore, right? Like, he's proven it, right? He's gone through major traumas. Right now, I hope they don't rush him out there for games, out there when he's not ready at this point, because, he could be putting the rest of his life on the line, not just his career. Yeah.
So when do you take it out of the player's hands? Let's say
there's automatics, right? I mean, if they're concussed, you take their helmet, you tell it, they can call you every name in the book. Their parents could be yelling at you from the stands, right? You're not letting them back in, right? There's no way, right? The coach can be yelling at you, if they're at serious risk, right? I've covered high school football where, you're covering a team for a high school, and the other opposing team's quarterback throws a pick, right? And then they try to make the tackle. They get up and fall over twice, right? I come over there, and I'm like, he's done for the game, right? The parents are yelling at me. Their coach is yelling at me, telling them I'm cheating to try to make sure that, the other team wins. I'm like, they're not. Well, one, they're not going to beat you because they're not very good, from that standpoint. But two, it's not worth it. And they're yelling at me. People get their bell rung every day. If you see he was in a boxing match, he got back up, right? He did a standing 8 count, put him back out there. Right? I'm like, what are you doing? Like, it's a high school game, right? It's the 3rd week of the season,
right.
And he fell over twice trying to get over to the sideline, right? I had to run over there, help pick him up and get him to the sideline from the other sideline, right? From that standpoint. And they're yelling at me for doing that, right? For making that decision, right? But you gotta do what's right, from that standpoint, for that, so, you gotta call it, hey, your game's over, right? It's not worth it.
So when you see blatant signs of relatively severe concussion, there's nothing a player can do or say to keep himself in the game, even if it were a championship, especially in high school. Because let's leave the NFL. Let's leave the NFL out of it, because the NFL is those are adults making business decisions. Like I said, coal miners used to risk death for 30 cents. But if you're at the youth level, college level, where this isn't your livelihood, you see any evidence of dilated pupils, slurred speech, not knowing that it's Saturday, that there's nothing a guy can do to prove it.
It's not worth it. It's not worth it
Completely.
I
for
would agree.
you as the coach. It's
Completely
not worth
agree.
it for me as a doctor. It's not worth it for them as the parent, right? If their kid's not there tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So to me, it's not worth it, right? They could hate you for the rest of their lives, but you got to make that right call, from that standpoint. You got to stop it, right?
I,
You
I,
know,
f- I find the bias implication really interesting because I've heard things like that before regarding people who are not directly responsible to the game and somehow their decision when it comes to either player or overall safety is a net negative for a team with because of someone's bias or because of someone's agenda. You're a medical doctor. You take an oath upon becoming a medical doctor to do no harm and to ensure that all that are under your care are getting the best care possible to their potential professional detriment. If I failed a physical, if I was Carlos Correa, yeah, I'd be mad. I'd be mad, but that would be a doctor telling me something for the betterment of my life, the longevity of my life in terms of being healthy and being an able-bodied human being. He's already got a couple $100 million. I'm a Met fan. It's been a long week.
You've been a Met fan. It's been a long life. My friend.
You don't need to rub it in, bro. Don't need to rub it
They
in.
look pretty good on paper right
They
now,
do.
man. But
They
you know how
do.
that goes. You know how that goes.
But
Oh,
Dr.
man.
DeLuigi, in the last few minutes we have with you here, what's your overall goal this year in getting the A7FL to be healthier? We talked about Damar Hamlin earlier. I know that there's been extensive conversations about CPR training being a universal mandatory thing, and I'm completely in favor of that. I think how we look at the game is going to continue to evolve, and I think your addition to the team is honestly one of the best moves we could make as a league when we're continuing to grow, because at the forefront of everything, it's not a marketing statement. It's not PR gaga. The players' health and safety is, to me, the most important thing because the players are the most important asset. If you're looking to protect your investment, and our investment are our players because our players are our collateral, they are the quantifiable thing we as a business sell. If I'm not doing my due diligence as, I work in the marketing and advertising department, so I'm going to push the idea of the game being safer, but we're going to back it up. And this is your hiring, your coming on board is backing that up. I know there's been conversations about you building a medical advisory board. What are the things, our final question to you is, what are the things you're looking for from a medical advisory board member, and what are the things you would want to impart to the players who are now falling under your purview about what your relationship with them and what the medical advisory board relationship with them will be?
Right. So in general, when we think about sports medicine, right, it's always been mostly musculoskeletal, right? That's what most people think about injuries, orthopedic style injuries, right? Concussion has been bigger, right? So now we started thinking about head injuries, but there's still many other traumatic injuries that can occur, right? And Damar Hamlin is, had shown that again, right? Severe chest trauma and cardiac issues are relatively uncommon, right? We have Hank Gathers, dying on a court. We have, Hamlin having to be resuscitated on the field, right? They happen. They don't happen as frequently as ACL tears. They don't happen as frequently as concussions, but they happen, right? So it reiterates the importance of still having plans for the full medical aspect of it, right? So, CPR training, by itself, right, it doesn't take a lot of time to learn how to do it correctly, right? And it can be life-changing, right? As Damar Hamlin, is clearly demonstrating, right? And for them to be able to have those staff personnel, right? But, in youth sports, if the coaches or get CPR training, you never know when somebody might go down in a grocery store or anywhere else where that could happen, right? But, if it's there and you're saving a child's life because you knew CPR and it's helpful, then by all means. So, but the medical advisory team that I'd like, be putting together would have experts on the different aspects of sports medicine from that standpoint, right? So we are looking for those medical conditions, right? The cardiopulmonary issues, right? Musculoskeletal, neurologic, head injury, right? From that standpoint. So we have experts across the overall spectrum, and then we would work with the leagues and the divisions from that standpoint, right? And sharing with them that, hey, we're here with you. We're not trying to, we're not trying to put people on the sidelines prematurely. We're not trying to, take away from your game. We're here to work beside you so that you have that trust that we're there, right? That we are, to your extent, your parachute, right? From that standpoint, right? You can go out there and give it your all, knowing that we're there beside you, right? And if you get hurt, or if you get injured, or if you're ill, we're there to help you get back out, and safely return to the game, right? The goal isn't for you to go out there and get hurt and have a catastrophic injury. You're going out there, you're enjoying the safe competition, in a combative sport, right? That you love, and our goal there is to say we are there, by your side, right, on the sidelines, right, from that standpoint, whether it's your trainer, whether it's the EMT staff, whether if you have a team doc or not, from that standpoint, we're all there working for your health and safety, right? Because we want you out there playing, right? We want you to not
He's talking to me, guys. You guys don't know.
we don't want you on the sideline standing next to me.
You guys can stand next to him.
Yeah. Well, we'll be in the booth calling the games and waiting for Cory to no longer be a member of the Rahway Schno tribe. Schnorr tribe. That was what they were last season.
Tribe.
You already snore. That's Rob from episode 22. Now, this is the question that I wanted to put my clown makeup on before, Dr. DeLuigi, and let's just assume that as busy and important as your life is, you may have missed some of our episodes of the 3-on-1 podcast, and we forgive you for that. But a constant theme has been my what?
Nothing. We've had a very serious medical conversation. He's a doctor from the Mayo Clinic. We don't have to do the merch plugs, but you know what?
I didn't even do which shirt he was going to pick yet. I was going to even make it more about Cory Hammond, guys. I was going to talk about my weight loss and how that coincides with my safety. Because let's be honest, I'm going to use this to the best of my ability to make this about me. So Dr. DeLuigi, we started this journey post championship where I was 235. Now, 6 foot 235, a little bit of chubbiness. I'm down to the 195.
Nice.
Should I be scared for my health? Because I've been relatively a healthy quarterback, and I'm a stand in the pocket, get hit all the time guy. My favorite opinion of me in our league is a guy, Big Mo Laffy, says that I'm made of iron. Now, some of what I was made of was lipids, and those are now not there. Should I be concerned at my weight, or is there something that I can do to make sure that even though I weigh less and am a little bit more fleet of foot, that I stay upright the entire 9 weeks of the season?
You've probably increased your elusiveness, right? That 45 pounds.
I went from,
he's like a Madden 04 now.
Yeah.
No. Excuse me. I went from like a 40, LJ would say, in elusiveness. Now I'm like a 67. So I'm at least comparable to, let's say, a Drew Bledsoe.
Always known for his elusiveness.
Exactly, which is why I will still be throwing the ball. Yeah. But obviously that was more of a joke than anything. But legitimately, is this a CC Sabathia situation? Should I be headed to McDonald's right now?
No, I think it's good. Again, give you that extra little mobility in the pocket, right? Getting, if you need to move out, right, and throw on the run, I think that's going to help you out, right?
That has been the book on me, doctor. So after 10 years of hearing the same thing, this is how stubborn I am. I made my decision on my own, ignoring everyone else. And I said, you know what? I have this great idea that no one's ever told me before. I'm going to work out and get in shape. But as everyone knows, I'll try.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I'm glad to hear it, right? Losing weight is not easy. And so it does take a lot of work and effort. And so congratulations on that. And I hope it leads to you having a great, successful season.
I just didn't eat after 8. And
I know I need to cut
out a little bit.
Too. Yeah.
And then now what they've ruined before, the most important question we ask every guest, and they don't love it, but I do. and no one's chosen my shirt, by the way, and I ask every week. We have some merch for the show, and it's based on either catchphrases or little things that, you know, kind of are associated with us. My guy Big Rob Fabian is known for the huss is the juke sound that he makes during the broadcast. That is a cool shirt option. You already know, because we talked about it. You already know, which we haven't talked about, and I'm not going to fill you in because you're too intelligent for all of that nonsense. But every season is thick boy season in the A7FL. Look at Matt. Matt is not. Rob groans and shakes his head at me all the time. At least, Matt, you're usually on my side. He's like, don't embarrass us in front of the smart people.
He works for the Mayo Clinic. We just know about mayonnaise.
And he enjoys his off time probably doing not intelligent stuff. Right, doctor? You're using your brain to top capacity all the time. You could deal with a little bit of idiocy, and that's what I'm here for.
That's the next shirt, a little bit of idiocy.
I mean, I would wear the one that says a lot of bit on the back, but Matt's shirt says thick boy season, has your boy. We were talking about the sexiness. Has your boy Matt. You know, my wife did a beautiful design and it's awesome. Or the I'll try. Yeah. So you have the three options of shirts, just so that we can keep the tally. Big Rob's is huss, the thick boy season shirt, or I'll try. Which would you go with, Doctor?
I mean, the huss is classic. So yeah.
Put another one up for Big Rob. Appreciate you, Doc.
I'm not even keeping track of this anymore. We're just going to say, all right, we know you're choosing huss of the other two, which you get. But let's be fair,
he's
Rob.
still fighting for a win. It's like watching him on the field. It's the fourth quarter. He's down 3. Half the team is down the street.
The thing that I say? I say what?
I'll try.
And I haven't stopped. And I will continue to.
Dr. DeLuigi.
Well, Doctor, thank you so much for dealing with my painted face. I got red cheeks, red nose, and we're good to go. Luckily I have my 2 intelligent sidekicks here. Well, I'm a sidekick.
I'm the host of the show. I woke up my dog having to remind people I'm the host.
I just did unzippered my zipper.
This is the other podcast. What is it?
No. Hey, Matt,
I am also
a sidekick.
Yeah, man. I'm not saying that you guys.
Am I a puppet? Am I the Jackie puppet now? You want me to write you jokes? I'm kidding. But Dr. DeLuigi, thank you so much for joining us.
You can write me some good jokes, Matt.
Thank you so much, Dr. DeLuigi, joining us here on the podcast. We'll hope to have you on under as fun circumstances as the back half of the podcast in the near future. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. And I want to thank everybody else for listening and enjoying the podcast. As always, you can follow us across social media. All that information is in the show notes. And if you want to buy some merch, it's tinyurl.com/A7FL merch. That's tinyurl.com/A7FL merch. For Dr. DeLuigi, for Cory Hammond, for Big Rob Fabian, I'm Matt Ryan, and as always, don't be an asshole.
I'll try.